Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. My name is Robert Schwartzley. Today I want to start off with a trivia question. What is the very first year of diesel Dodge pickup? If you said 1989, thinking of the 1989 Cummins Ram, you're actually wrong. And now if you really want to get technical and say, well, actually it was August 1988 that the first gens rolled off the assembly line, you would again be wrong. That's not what I'm referring to. It may surprise you to know that the Cummins was not the first or the second brand of diesel engine that was installed into a Dodge pickup. So I want to go back to the history of all this today. So grab yourself a drink, grab yourself a snack, and sit back, relax, and we're going to cover the history of Dodge and Cummins and how this all came to be. So today I want to cover the history of two companies that are both very important to me, Cummins and Dodge, and how this all came to be. Both companies are very important to me. I've been involved with both companies for close to 2.5 decades now in various capacities, some corporate stuff and some stuff just as a regular enthusiast. And I've seen a lot of rumors over the years that have floated around regarding Cummins diesel engines, and everything from Ford owned them to how they saved Chrysler. And I even just recently saw a video of a company in Detroit claiming they installed the very first Cummins diesel into the old Dodge D-body chassis, and they're responsible for it all. So I wanted to go back to kind of a little bit of the beginning here. For me, I've been involved in these trucks, and many of you know my truck. I've got a 4-door crew cab W350 that I started the restoration of back in the early 2000s, and this truck was well documented long before YouTube existed, and we're still prior to social media. We're using forums to exchange photos and videos, and that's what I used a lot of, and many of you know me from those days. That was a 13-year restoration on that truck. You may also know me as the face behind my Instagram account at W350 Crew Cab, or even the face behind my company at First Gen Industries. I wanted to really cover a lot of this because back when I started playing with these trucks, and as many people inform me, that was back when you guys were just being born. I was very fortunate back in that era because back in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of the men and women who designed these trucks and the engine were actually still involved with their corporate duties. So when I first started playing with these first gens, you know, I used to go to some of the events down at Cummins Corporate, and I got to meet a lot of the people who were responsible for the designing of the engine and, in actual fact, designing of the truck as well. And these folks were kind enough to take me as a young kid under their wing, a very young, excited guy and is new to him first gen, and they were kind enough to sit down with me and tell me the stories of how these trucks came to be. And there's been a couple of history books that have slowly started to touch on the first gens and how Cummins and Dodge came to be, but no one's actually covered the true story. And watching all these rumors now float around, and as the first gens have started rising into the limelight a bit more, I felt it was time that we actually put the history on paper as told to me by the men and women who actually designed these trucks. As most are aware, the introduction of the 1989 Dodge Cummins equipped Rams revolutionized the pickup truck market. While the other brands were playing with indirect injection, non-turbocharged, low compression and low output diesels, Dodge came bucking out of left field with an angry bull under the hood in the form of an underrated 160 horsepower, 400 foot-pound of torque, direct injection, whole set turbocharged, 12-valve, 6-cylinder engine out of a world-renowned equipment engine manufacturer. To say Dodge had upped the competition would be a gross understatement, and the sales numbers prove this. Most, however, think that Dodge did some research and they just lucked out with a joint venture with Cummins at its first crack in the diesel game. The fact of the matter is, Dodge had already sold vehicles for over 50 years with diesel engines. As a famous tow truck once said, you have to know where you've been to know where you're going, so let's take a step backwards in time. Dodge offered its first diesel back in 1939 with a 331 cubic inch 6-cylinder that was a 4-stroke diesel of its own design for use in their 3-ton trucks. Through the 1950s and 60s, Chrysler Corporation continued to expand into export markets like South America, Europe, and a large customer base in the UK. Despite what most people think that Chrysler mostly was a North American brand, the reality is Dodge sold vehicles on every continent of this planet, including Australia. Unlike the United States, diesels were actually very common in the rest of the countries around the world, so Chrysler Corporation continued to offer what local markets desired: diesel cars and trucks. While Dodge did do a few partnerships, the most common brand of diesels for these export markets were Perkins. So when the time came for a pickup truck with a diesel, Dodge was getting back into waters they had understood for many years. If you're thinking that they explored a diesel pickup for the first time in the 80s though, with the Cummins partnership, you'd actually be incorrect. It was much, much earlier. For the United States market, Dodge actually offered from 1962 to 1964 a diesel option for its W300 and D400 pickup trucks. You could order option code 28-01A, and that ordered you a 354 cubic inch 6-cylinder direct injection Perkins diesel that was normally available on the medium duty D500 and D600 trucks. That option code would give you a whopping 120 horsepower engine, and that power was actually pretty decent for that era in a pickup truck. While not much information is available to how many of these trucks were made, they were made in very limited numbers, with only one or two actually still being known to exist to this day. After 1964 though, Dodge dropped the offering as they felt the market really had no interest in a diesel pickup, and their crappy sales figures actually supported that. Back in the 1970s, as many of you are aware, the OPEC fuel situation made it difficult, to say the least, for vehicle owners to keep their vehicles filled with fuel. Also, with the first big Environmental Protection Agency push for gas vehicle emissions in full force, looking at things like diesels became a much more cost-effective option than some of the emission hurdles they needed to deal with the gas-powered vehicles in the light truck segment. Further, any alternative fuel from gasoline was something worth exploring, as there was a nationwide fuel shortage. As that was the case, all the auto manufacturers were starting to play with alternative fuels in their vehicles, and supplementing diesels into the line was the first step in avoiding the looming gasoline emission laws. While Chrysler Corporation was leading the development from the turbine engine side that would burn everything from peanut oil, Chanel No. 5 perfume, and anything else that was combustible, the diesel engine was a quick and simple way to go. The most infamous of these early diesels trying to deal with this OPEC situation was likely the GM gasoline 350 V8 engine conversions that converted a 350 gasoline engine to diesel, and it created the stigma of old, smelly, and non-reliable diesels that America amazingly has still not 100% got over yet to this day. However, a vehicle that is not so often remembered that was launched at the same time as GM's was Dodge's next attempt at the diesel pickup truck, that also ended in a sales nightmare after just 1 year production. During the 1970s, Dodge was still manufacturing the medium and heavy-duty truck lines. The large highway tractors like the rare CNT 950 Bighorns and 1000 cabovers were actually available with a wide variety of Detroit two-strokes and Cummins diesels. With a full diesel team in the design office, they had the engineering capability to look into offering a quick option for the D-Series civilian pickups. When the engineering finally stopped and the 1978 Rams went to market, Dodge had responded to the market demand with a 243 cubic inch Mitsubishi 6DR50A inline 6-cylinder diesel engine being available in the D&W 150 and D&W 200 models. Interesting, the literature of the era did not list it as a D&W 100, even though that was technically the model names in that era. The 243 Diesel 6, as Dodge called it, was also available in a regular cab, club cab, and crew cab short box bodies, but it did not show as available for the 1-ton trucks. The engine was pirated from, actually, of all things, a forklift, and the naturally aspirated 4-liter with a 20-to-1 compression ratio, putting out a whopping 103 horsepower at 3,700 RPM, was slow to say the least. It had an amazing and astounding stump-pulling 168 foot-pounds of torque at 2,200 RPM. That's not even a joke. Interestingly to note, the engine decal said the engine had a 4,000 RPM max unloaded redline and a 3,700 RPM loaded redline. In going with that diesel option, that allowed you to get a 3-speed automatic or a 4-speed NP 435 manual transmission. Gross vehicle weight rating could be had between 6,100 and 8,500 pounds, and Motor Trend reported a blistering 0 to 60 time
at a whopping 27 seconds. You heard that correctly. 27 seconds of asphalt scorching speed. This did not help America to see the full potential of what a diesel engine could do for them. One thing the lack of power did make up for, though, was in regards to the fuel economy. Even with its full-time four-wheel drive system on the W Series trucks running at all time, the 4-speed stick truck that Motor Trend reporters were testing got over 19 miles a gallon with a combination of highway, city, and off-road driving. Do note that this likely would have included a few wide-open throttle runs in order to achieve their 0 to 60 times, which means they were not trying for fuel economy numbers. According to what I could find by the original documentation and some online blogs where owners of these trucks have chimed in, people have seen mid to high 30s in miles per gallon when operating these trucks strictly on highway. So what happened to all these trucks? Well, the engine option was a flop to say the least. The engines proved to be very underpowered, and they also had some reliability issues. While speaking with retired Chrysler engineer Troy Simonson, who later headed up the Cummins Ram project for Chrysler, he said that all in all, the Mitsubishi diesel engine project was a mess, and the trucks very quickly fell off the radar. Due to the crumbling vehicle market and the recession in the late 1970s, Chrysler began to flounder and go bankrupt. Newly hired CEO Iacocca, however, showed up in 1978 to lead Chrysler into a new era. With loan guarantees backed by the U.S. government, Iacocca began plans for new product lines that would take the company to a new age. One of the things Lee commissioned was to have built was the third largest building in the United States, known as the Chrysler Tech Center, and it was to become the new headquarters for Chrysler Corporation. This new facility in Auburn Hills, Michigan, would become home to the new Chrysler and a home of a new team of engineers tasked with creating new product that the market would want. Inside this amazing building, all engineering could be done in one spot. It was from concept design, component design, product testing, and complete dyno facility with wind tunnel testing, all in-house. There was even a vehicle assembly line in the basement of the facility so that they could pre-test the assembly lines before it would be set up in one of the assembly plants. This was a new era of Chrysler, and Lee saw the way to the future, and his vision of what Chrysler could be would eventually become reality. This included diesel pickups.
In 1981, Lee Iacocca went to let's revolutionize the Dodge truck line. So he looked for an internal engineer who would be responsible for finding a diesel for the D-Series pickup truck. He called on the help of Troy Simonson. He was an engineer who has a long legacy with Chrysler Corporation. Troy, back in his younger days when he first joined the company, Troy was actually involved in the motorsport side of the company. Troy liked going fast. So in his early days, he was actually involved in the introduction of the Hemi, the original 426 Hemi when it was launched, and it was actually racing on the Daytona 500. That was the race that it was launched on. They kept having an issue with the pistons melting down, and Troy was heavily involved in that, and he actually had driven the night after they got the pole position, they had actually melted the pistons down inside the block, and Troy did an all-nighter driving from Highland Park in Detroit, driving all the way down to Florida through the night, and actually brought the pistons down. They installed it in the engine that night, and that actually won the Daytona 500. A couple of years later, as you got into 1965 and 66, Troy was the only person of Chrysler Corporation to serve for both the Golden Commandos of Plymouth, the drag race team, and the Ram Chargers. So Troy had a very good background with actually playing with high horsepower and playing with some of the fun stuff. As the OPEC years moved on, he has ended up being transferred into the truck division, and he was responsible for putting 360 police interceptor motors into vehicles like the Little Red Express truck, the Warlock, Macho wagons. These were all stuff that Troy was a part of. Come 1981, a few years later, Lee Iacocca had called on him and said, look, Troy, this is what we need. We need a diesel engine that is way better than this Mitsubishi situation. Go out to whoever you need to and go find us a proper diesel engine to put inside these trucks, because we need something that's actually going to set us apart from the rest of the market. And that's when Troy got brought on board with the Dodge Cummins venture.
It may surprise you to know, but by the start of the 1980s, the D-Series pickup was selling in such low numbers, Dodge had planned to drop the entire pickup truck line from the company by 1987. The line was actually considered a lost cause and a cost burden to the company. This is why in 1983, the Club Cab was dropped, and in 1985, the Crew Cab 4-door was dropped. The goal was by 1987 for Dodge to be fully removed from the light truck market, as the aging D-body launched already back in 1972 was getting tired, and it wasn't worth putting money into to redesign or bring it up to modern day needs. With less than 3% market share, Troy went out to start visiting diesel engine manufacturers to find a suitable engine. The engine that fit all of the standards was the key, something that wasn't slow. It had to have power for towing, a robust engine with durability and ease of use for the American market that didn't understand diesels, an engine that would still be easy to use in the cold weather areas of the country. Further, the paperwork called for a supplier who would be able to supply up to 1,000 engines, as that would be the program size. With past relations with Perkins and Mitsubishi, they were first on the list. But with nothing meeting the needs, the search continued. In 1981, Troy met with John Keel of Cummins, and they got to test drive a Ford E-Series van with a brand new 4B engine mounted in it. Determining the engine was underpowered, the search continued to include Cat, Volvo, and any other manufacturer with a lightweight diesel. While there were some discussions for a bit on a inline 5-cylinder B-Series with Cummins, it was determined not to be the right choice for several reasons. In the fall of 1984, though, Troy's phone rang. It was John Keel at Cummins again. He asked if Troy would come back down to Cummins headquarters in Indiana. He wanted Troy to test their new for 1984, their 5.9 B-Series 6BT. Like the 4B Troy didn't like, the engine had 2 more cylinders and a lot more power. So Troy made the trip down to Cummins and said that he was impressed with the new 6BT, but felt the block was too long to fit in the D-Series pickup. Cummins, however, felt the opposite. After studying the design files, Chrysler built a non-functional mock-up providing enough info to prove that it would work. Unlike the 1970s, where Dodge had an entire engineering team dedicated to trucks, the truck division was closed, and they no longer had the diesel engineers on staff due to, unfortunately, some of the casualty of bankruptcy. With engineering manpower still at a minimum, John suggested that Chrysler should send Cummins a brand new truck, and Cummins would prove to them that this diesel would fit. With nothing to lose, Troy sent a brand new red and white 1985 360 cubic inch V8 D350 down to Cummins in January of 1985, and then awaited the call. Cummins sent the truck over to Cummins SEDC, or Cummins Small Engine Development Center, where Chris Wilkins spec'd the engine for the truck, and Joe Buchanan and his technician Butch Murray became the first to shoehorn this new engine into a pickup truck. In February, a call came from Indiana to Troy's phone with a request to come down and see what they managed to figure out. While driving through Indianapolis, Troy commented that he had seen a 1985 D350 pass him at a high rate of speed on the interstate, but he didn't think much of it. When he arrived at the arranged meeting place, he said he was surprised to find that that truck that had passed him was the truck that he had sent down to Cummins with its newly installed 6BT, and Cummins was doing some final test runs before his arrival. After a test drive, Troy said that he was beyond pleased with the power and how the engine checked off every box on the engineering list. This truck, today known as D001, it was the very first D-Series truck to have a Cummins engine. With the test drive successful, an agreement was formed in April of 1985. Dodge would commit to buying 1,000 B-Series engines for their D-Series truck line. The Dodge side felt that this was a reasonable number due to their last 2 failed attempts. Cummins, on the other hand, only took on this agreement as they felt that they would do much better in sales and they might be able to sell several thousand engines to Dodge. The deal was signed, and it was way more complicated than most people realize even to this day. The deal was not just to sell a few engines outright. The deal was for a 25-year exclusivity to Dodge for Class 2 through 4 engines, and that essentially means that Cummins could sell engines for Class 5 and up medium duty through semi-truck and on-road applications, but they could not sell to any other pickup truck manufacturers for Class 5 and under. This is where it's often confused, as Ford sold some trucks with Cummins engines, but that was for their 650 trucks and up. The contract was exclusive, but at the same time didn't limit Cummins from keeping their traditional market. And while I mentioned the word Ford, I should also mention another rumor that Ford owned Cummins. They did not, although Ford did invest in some shares for a while as an investment. In no way did they own Cummins. I do find it interesting that Dodge was planning only a 1-year run of 1,000 engines, but was able to do a 25-year contract. As Dodge was still understaffed and did not have the skill set in-house for the engine incorporation, it was decided Cummins would be subcontracted to facilitate the engineering and development on the platform, while working closely with the Dodge team. The Cummins division, ADC, and its team would be tasked with making this happen. The project called for the 1989 model year program, to be launched of these diesel-equipped trucks. As such, Dodge continued making trucks for a few more years versus canceling the regular cab truck, which at this point was the only configuration still being offered. Larry Moore, who would eventually become head of the Chrysler venture from the Cummins side, was the second engineer to be assigned to the program. The first was David Koberlein, and he would be the one tasked to oversee this venture, and he and his team would get a total of 32 trucks over the next 2 years to do their various tests with. As Larry said, Cummins was contracted by Chrysler to design, develop, test, and validate a turnkey diesel package for the 1989 model year D truck. That contract stipulated that Cummins must use all of the Chrysler spec vehicle test procedure. Consequently, all the program trucks were used extensively for this work. For example, vehicle and driveline durability testing, hot and cold weather testing, crash testing, performance and trailer tow testing, noise, vibration, harshness testing, etc. Larry continues saying, I was the second Cummins engineer assigned to the 89 model year program. I was responsible for the design, development, testing, and production validation of the engine and transmission cooling system, the HVAC system, and all the vehicle modifications required to accommodate those systems, including front-end sheet metal and grille changes. I was also responsible for the new front spring shocks and springs needed to handle the extra weight of the engine. In addition, I provided support for the pilot builds and the launch at the Warren Truck Assembly Plant in Detroit. I spent a lot of time on hot and cold trips and at Warren Truck Assembly. He continues with, the 1989 team was relatively small starting out. 5 engineers, 5 draftsmen, 5 technicians, and a couple of managers, but grew to about double that size by the end of the 1989 program. However, it remained a skunk works within Cummins, which allowed us to work pretty much as we needed without any corporate bureaucracy to hinder us. Over the next few years, design continued. With the much heavier engine up front, the D-Series body that had not had much chassis improvements had to undergo many tests. As Larry once mentioned, he said that they beat the trucks to death, and he somewhat recalls replacing body mounts on a daily basis. One of the tasks ADC was tasked with was transmission testing. I bring this up as there has always been a lot of discussion on this topic in the first-gen community on why such weak transmission were used. For the automatic, Chrysler chose their strongest transmission they had at the time. That was the A727. This transmission had been used since 1962 when it replaced the A488 automatic. The 3-speed transmission was used as the heavy-duty transfer Chrysler vehicles, ending up in trucks, being behind the legendary 426 Hemis and 440 multi-carb engines in the 60s, and that became the transit choice for racing and towing applications for the previous few decades. As a manual transmission selection, Chrysler had a contract going with Getrag for supplying transmissions for the manual transmission cars they were producing at the time. Dodge selected the G360 as they felt it would hold up to the engine's power, as the Getrag catalog cited a 420 foot-pound rating on the transmission. Being a 400 foot-pound engine, they felt this would be sufficient. One of David's tasks at ADC was selecting driveline components for the program, as he felt the spec would be fine, and all development testing of the Getrag-equipped trucks showed this transmission to be up to the task, and the power ratings were all conservative. All said and done, transmissions were not the fail point on any of these trucks during testing. That is why we ended up with the 2 transmissions in these trucks. Braking parts was a common occurrence for these trucks, as they did need to meet Chrysler's stringent test procedures. With way more power and weight than any D-Series truck had had to date, they were bound to show their weak points. Larry once said, most of the failures experienced during the testing of the 1989 model program were vehicle-related and caused by the adding of weight and power of the diesel engine. I don't recall any engine-specific failures, but a lot of engine challenges, most notably cold start and smoke-related issues. These trucks were tested at several proving grounds, including the Transportation Research Center, Chrysler's Chelsea Proving Grounds in Michigan, where cold weather testing would be conducted, and Chrysler's Arizona Proving Grounds, where high heat testing would be performed. Additional testing was also done in various Chrysler cold test cells for winter starting conditions, and many trips to Minnesota for real-world testing. In all, 570,000 miles were accumulated on these trucks during development, 245,000 of which were done at the Transportation Research Center. The 5.9 B Series engine was designed to be a 180 horsepower at 2,800 RPM engine for the aftercooled 6-cylinder version. In the case of Dodge, the 6-cylinder non-aftercooled version was selected for this pickup. In final form, the engine would be 160 horsepower, 400 foot-pounds of torque. The initial 160 horsepower at 2,500 RPM and 400 foot-pounds at 1,700 RPM rating was based on the torque limitations of primarily the 727 automatic transmission. It would handle no more than 400 foot-pounds with a reasonable safety margin. Further, the engine was limited to 2,500 RPM at rated power for emissions reasons, so the engine's torque curve yielded 336 foot-pounds and 160 horsepower at that 2,500 RPM. In 1986, roughly 100 weeks before production would begin, early pilot builds began being built at Warren Truck Assembly. By the start of 1988, regular pilot trucks were being built. On August 2nd, 1988, many years of hard work came to a point at Dodge City Assembly Plant in Warren, Michigan. The very first D-Series truck was being assembled. Due to Dodge's plan to build only 1,000 trucks, these Cummins-equipped trucks would be built in a different format than the traditional V8 trucks. Traditionally, the engine dress line would build and prep the engines and transmission for drop into the chassis. As the plant didn't have any space to put another line, and Dodge wasn't about to build a new expansion on the building for only an anticipated 1,000 trucks, Cummins on-time assemblies in Redford, Michigan, a facility less than 30 minutes from the plant, would be tasked with the job of prepping the driveline module assemblies and would be on a just-in-time delivery supply. See, the B-Series engine was a joint venture between Cummins and Case called Consolidated Diesel Corporation, or CDC. Cummins provided the design and Case manufactured it in their Rocky Mount, North Carolina plant. The engine was originally intended for off-road use in construction and ag equipment, but it was an ideal fit for the pickup. As such, unlike the traditional Dodge means where they would build their own engine, this engine was already coming from an outside supplier fully assembled. So the engine would be shipped to on-time assemblies, and there it would be converted into one of the 8 driveline modules the plant would require. It may surprise you to hear that there were 8 different engine combinations used at the plant in the first-gen trucks. The modules were based on the options of the truck. For example, there was the option of having a manual trans or an automatic transmission bolted to the engine. That's 2 different versions. Then there was a 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive. Now we're up to 4 configurations. Now add air conditioning and non-air conditioning to each of those 4, making 8 total options for Chrysler to deal with. To assist in making sure that there would be easy identification of the engine at a quick glance, Chrysler had Cummins install quick reference tracking labels on valve cover 1. This is that 8-digit Chrysler part number with 5 small numbers and 3 large numbers that's on valve cover 1 of all of our engines. There would be 8 different configuration numbers per engine CPL for all 1989 to 1993 Dodge trucks.
Now came the exciting part. In the summer of 1989, orders opened for the production Dodge Cummins trucks. This was something that everyone had been working toward for multiple years, and they finally were able to take orders. Remember, Dodge had only planned on building roughly 1,000 trucks. For the 1989 model year, which began being built in the summer of '88, they received over 10,000 orders for these trucks. Dodge was not prepared for this, Cummins was not prepared for it, so they actually had to shut orders off at the 10,000 mark. For 1990, they figured they would finish doing the production and maybe sell a couple more. Well, they opened the orders for the 1990 model year, and they had to cap it off at 15,000 trucks because, again, they had way surpassed what they anticipated sales volume to be. This is why it's actually so hard to find one of the early first gens, because they had so many manufacturing restrictions because they never anticipated having that many trucks sold. From everyone's end, this was a success though. From the dealer's end, they were selling trucks like hotcakes when they couldn't even sell trucks for the last few years. For the Iacocca, this had proved to him that yes, there was in actual fact a business model still for the pickup trucks. From Cummins' end, they always said from day one they believed that there was way more market potential than 1,000 trucks, and this proved them correct. And for everyone involved in the program, that was a lot of time and effort that they were finally able to say yes, this was well done, and now they could actually go down the road of engineering for the next stage of the trucks.
You would think the rest is history and everyone celebrated the new success with champagne and record profits, but the story of the first gen isn't over yet. More so, it's actually just beginning. With sales booming, there was a new problem. Consolidated Diesel down in North Carolina was out of capacity. They had never intended to be building 15,000 plus truck engines a year for Dodge on their equipment line. As such, orders for the 89, 90, and 91 trucks were capped actually based on the production capacity of CDC. For 92, work began on building the Cummins mid-range engine assembly plant, known as CMEP, which would become home of the Dodge engines, and CDC would continue building the engines for their application. This is why to this day you can get parts for your non-intercooled engine from Case. The CPL 0804 engines were the same for both the Bulldozer and the Dodge Ram. That changed, though, when Dodge went to the newer CPLs. Aside from supply, there was a new issue. The EPA mandated a new diesel emission standard for January 1st, 1991. While the original plan was for a 1989 model year only engine option, this now created a new issue if the truck was going to be sold into 1991. As such, development had to begin on an intercooled truck. While many people think that the intercooler was added for the sake of more power, the rated power for the intercooled and non-intercooled trucks remained the same. The reason for the addition of the intercooler was to reduce nitrous oxide emissions by lowering intake air temperature via a charge air cooler. There was also an issue slowly developing with trucks that were already being used in the field. See, once you end up with a medium-duty equipment engine in your Dodge pickup, people began towing way past the tow ratings that these trucks were designed for, causing coolant temperatures to be higher than desired. The automatic 727 transmission also left much to be desired in the way of highway speed. Average speed with a 727 truck pedal on the floor at redline was 71 miles an hour. With the sales numbers to support the financial investment of bettering the truck, Chrysler Engineering was allowed to move forward in making some upgrades to these trucks. Development of the intercooled truck was not just as simple as adding an intercooler as many people think. The space required in the core support for the intercooler would require the headlights to change location and also a new grille to accommodate the space needed between the radiator and the grille for the intercooler. Further, the new intercooler would cause additional heat loads for a radiator that was already having issues, so they would now need to be changed as well. As Larry Moore once told me, the 1989 diesel cooling system was designed so that the coolant temp in the radiator top tank at wide open throttle, full load, with 55 mile an hour ram air at 100 degrees Fahrenheit would not exceed 230 degree coolant temperature. These conditions were equivalent to a truck at 16,000 gross weight running up Baker Grade in California, which is 4% grade for 10 miles, at 55 mile an hour on a 100 degree day. We confirmed during many runs up Baker that we met this goal. We went to a larger crossflow rad in the 91.5 trucks to compensate for the increased air heat load and flow restrictions due to the charge air cooler being located in front of the radiator. We continued to meet the 230 degree max temperature goals with this configuration. Due to this, two brand new 1989 Cummins equipped trucks were acquired by Advanced Drivetrain Corp to begin development of the 1991.5 diesel program. D047 and D048 became these two trucks. Upon receiving them, the trucks were converted to intercooled and eventually the Dodge spec engine installed. For the 1991 model year, the 91 trucks became the bastard child of all the first-gen years. All trucks would have the new plastic intercooled grille designed to meet the corporate design and marketing needs, but there would be two engines used within the same year. August to early February trucks were non-intercooled 0804 engines, but after February 6, 1991, all trucks became intercooled 1351s. Interestingly enough, due to a rule that if a truck began assembly before January 1st, it was allowed to be built with the previous year's engine. Due to this, Dodge began production on as many trucks as they could before January 1st, taking until February to finish building all of these trucks. As such, engine serial number 4457790 shows to be the first 1351 engine made by Cummins for Dodge, showing a build date of February 6, 1991, 5 weeks after the EPA required the changeover. While most assume that the first gen 12-valve is a 12-valve, the 0804 engine and the 1351 engine only share 10% of the parts. And this has been something I've heard for many, many years in the first gen world is, oh, I need parts for my truck. Well, what is it? Well, it's a first gen. Here's a great example. Blocks, heads, entire fuel system, oil pans, pistons, and turbo are all different between the intercooled and non-intercooled engine. Be very careful when buying parts for your first gen and make sure that they actually match your CPL. With the new 1351 engine, it was touted as the largest turbo to ever be sent to Dodge on a 12-valve engine. That includes second gens. The 1351 engine received a 21 centimeter exhaust nail, resulting in the engine getting a lot of customer complaints as being underpowered. Due to this, the 1351 engine was very short-lived, and the last 1351 engine for Dodge showed being built on November 14th, 1991. It was replaced by engine CPL 1579 with an 18 centimeter turbo snail, which remained on the engine until the end of first-gen production. Another thing to change with the incoming of the intercooled engine was the transmission. We now went to an A518 4-speed automatic. This was essentially a 727 with overdrive assembly added to the back of it and still remained a non-lockup torque converter style transmission. But with its .68 overdrive gear, it finally allowed automatic equipped trucks to do normal highway speeds without sitting on redline. This also marked the change of all automatic Dana axles, changing from the previous 307 equipped Dana 71 and Dana 61 fronts to now be the same as the manual transmissions with Dana 70 and Dana 60s. You can now also choose axle ratio options for your automatic of 410s or the normal 354s, where all 727 trucks were automatically 3.07 ring gears. 1991 also saw the change of the Getrag transmission to the modified trans. While we complain today about the weakness of the G360 Getrag, this was already showing its inability to handle heavy loads in 1990. As such, revision 2 of the Getrag was installed. You can identify this by the extra case strengthening ribs used to prevent case flex, thus keeping the main shafts better aligned. For 1992, Dodge continued to expand its offering by pulling the old tooling for the club cab out of storage, which allowed customers to order club cabs again. As the new 8-inch tall frame rails had returned during 1991, the trucks could now be done with diesels in extended cab 149-inch wheelbase trucks. This also worked into Dodge's plan by this time, as Warren Truck was struggling to keep up with demand, much like CDC had. As the Dodge City, later known as Warren Truck, plant was originally built for wartime production in World War II, the assembly line bends are not set up for anything longer than a regular cab pickup. As such, all club cab production would happen at the Mexican Ram facility, taking some pressure off the Dodge City plant and distributing the orders between the two plants. On December 12, 1991, Dodge and Cummins celebrated at Dodge City Assembly in Warren, Michigan, for the 100,000th Cummins Ram was produced. This was a 1992 W250 regular cab truck. While it doesn't seem like a lot, one must remember this was a far cry from a company that was planning to ditch the Ram truck line 6 years earlier. With the launch of the 1991 models, with its successful integration of the intercooler, the plans began to shift again, only this time to the T300 project. While many people today aren't really that aware of the term, T300 was actually the original name for the second-gen trucks. The Chrysler design department was given a huge budget now due to so many diesel trucks selling that Iacocca told engineering to develop a brand new truck from scratch and design the body to be sleek and modern and to do away with the old square box. Included in this design was to incorporate all of the fixes that were required on the first gens. This included better interiors, a better transmission, bigger, stronger axles, a stronger frame, a bigger radiator for cooling, and higher tow ratings. But the most important, it needed to look amazing. As such, Tom Gale and his design team went to work and designed the new truck to look like a mini semi. The hood, being the same height as the fenders, was to be gone with in favor of the new T600 Kenworth-style stepped fenders. Playing off the heavy-duty truck classification of being a Class 8 truck, Dodge made their 350 the T300, as it's a Class 3 truck. For this new truck, the power would also need to be bumped, but also the engine needed to meet new upcoming emission standards. So Cummins began work on the new engine that would feature a 180 horsepower, courtesy of the Bosch P7100 inline injection pump. This pump would not only allow for future power bumps, but it would also better deal with the new emissions by better distributing fuel through 6 plungers versus the VE16's rotary single plunger. As such, D047 and 48 had its engine removed again, and it went with a prototype P-pump 12 valve with intercooler and NV4500 transmission sourced from the Chrysler GM joint venture New Venture Gear. D047 would remain with its this engine to present day, even though the truck was retired and sold to ADC and used as a shop truck in '93. By the time all was said and done, Cummins supplied approximately 200,000 engines for 1989 to 93 Dodge Rams. This was the start of a fantastic joint venture that would prove to be one of the most fruitful partnerships in the automotive history. As the T300 project launched, the remaining mules for the project were scrapped, leaving only 4 of those trucks to exist to this day: D001, 02, 032, and 048. As for the T300 trucks, they sold like hotcakes. The most revolutionary body style to ever be offered in a pickup drew people in from all brands and left Ford and GM scrambling to play catch-up. Dodge had taken the world by storm. With the new design, the new heavy-duty driveline options, even a V10 gasoline engine trumped the other brands' V8s. Dodge had made it. They now had 2 full-time assembly plants running production, and they couldn't keep up. By 1995, Dodge was making more than 400,000 pickup trucks a year. As we all know, this was the start of a 35-year and counting partnership. The light-duty Class 2 and 3 truck market was forever changed thanks to this partnership. While it's often said that Cummins saved Dodge, that is a very true statement for the truck line. What is also true, however, is that Dodge helped save Cummins. By 1992, Dodge had become Cummins' largest customer, and that allowed Cummins to rapidly expand into new markets and offer new engines. And they also continued to have an influx of sales, providing more and more engineering dollars so they could continue to grow. It was truly a win-win for both companies.
I want to thank everyone for taking the time to sit down and watch this. This has been a video I've wanted to do for some time. This is the information that was fortunately I was able to listen to directly from the people who were involved with this, and I watched so much misinformation float around. People ask questions on Facebook under some of the first-gen groups and social media and on the forums. People ask for the history, but unfortunately most of the history books have never covered a lot of this. So this is information that I've been fortunate to have for many years, and I finally want to share due to motivation with the passing of 2 of the guys who were responsible for these trucks. In May 2019, we lost Troy Simonson, and in January of 2022, due to COVID, we lost Larry Moore. And with the passing of the 2 guys, I felt it was time that we actually get this information actually put into permanent digital form, I guess, so to speak, and we could put it out there so that everyone could actually truly hear this firsthand. For me, I know that these trucks are my life. This is, for anyone who's followed me for years, you know that my passion is very deep in these first gens, and without guys like Troy and Larry, we wouldn't have these trucks. And for me, I don't know what I would do with my life. I mean, I have a whole company that revolves around these trucks now because of my passion for them. So for me, I want the correct information to be out there. So share this video, send it off to everyone else in the community. The reality is this isn't for my information. This isn't just for me to hold. This is information for our entire community. Whether you're a 3rd-gen guy, 2nd-gen guy, brand new to this, or have been in this for 30 years since day one, this is the history of our community. The Dodge Cummins community. I've met thousands of enthusiasts all over the country. This is our knowledge and information, and no one's ever put this together. So I felt it was time that this information happen, and that's what we're covering here today. So thank you for taking the time. Without you guys watching, there's no point in me doing this. So thank you very much. And if you want to see more, please subscribe to my channel. I'm going to work really hard on putting together an actual channel and covering a lot of this type of information, as I have accumulated a lot of notes over the last many years. If you want to see more photos of first gens in general, you can find me on Instagram under @W350 Crew Cab, also under my company @First Gen Industries. You can also go to my company website. I have a lot of information on these trucks there. That's @firstgenindustries.com. And we up, we down, and we gone.